Hello guys, welcome to Apple Insider. My name is Mark Ellis and I want to talk today about the iPad. So in July this year, Apple announced a record-breaking third quarter, and the numbers, as is nearly always the case, were just biblical. And just to quickly run through them, I've had to note them down because I'm terrible at remembering numbers, but the total revenue for Q3 of 2021 was $81.4 billion. And that's a massive 36.3% year-on-year growth. More interestingly, if we compare Q3 of this year against previous year's Q1s, and Q1 is generally the best quarter for Apple in terms of revenue, but if we compare the Q3 of this year against, for instance, Q1 of 2019, it was only $3 billion. Still a lot of money, but in Apple money, that's not very much. Just $3 billion behind Q1 of 2019. And it has just smashed Q1s from previous years. It's huge, and obviously that number is made up of all sorts of things these days, from obviously the iPhone to Macs to services, which is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But nestled within that figure is the iPad. And in Q3 this year, the iPad achieved $7.4 billion in sales. Now that's nearly a 12% increase year on year, which doesn't sound like a huge number in Apple terms, but when you consider the fact that Q3 last year was actually, making note of this, a 31% year on year increase, there's some serious momentum with the iPad at the moment. And that's interesting because for years and years, the iPad has pretty much plateaued. And that's for one very good reason. You buy an iPad and it lasts you for years. So very, very few people buy iPads year on year. Now, obviously I buy lots of iPads to review, but most people, most normal people, will buy an iPad and keep it from anywhere between 2 to 5 years, maybe even longer. Now, this Q3 saw the release of two iPads, which was the M1 versions of the 11-inch and 12.9-inch iPad Pros. There weren't any other releases. The iPad Air, which is this one here, was released back in October 2020. The iPad Mini, there's been rumors about that being updated. Nothing's happened so far. Basically, there was only two iPads that were launched during this huge quarter for Apple, yet the revenue is still increasing. That begs the question, was it all down to that M1 chip in the new iPad Pro? I don't think so. Now, I can't say this with any certainty because we don't get the breakdown of the figures in terms of individual devices from Apple. They don't tell us how many iPad Pros they've sold, for example. We have to make educated guesses with this. I think this continued impressive performance revenue-wise for the iPad is down to two devices, and they're two devices I showed you a moment ago. The first one is the brilliant fourth generation iPad Air. I bought this back in October last year, and it is absolutely brilliant. It's a bit of a rod for Apple's back. They've created a bit of a problem for themselves because while this exists, I personally can't recommend the 11-inch iPad Pro. Okay, this one doesn't have ProMotion, it doesn't have the M1 chip, and it has a slightly smaller screen, Touch ID rather than Face ID. That's it though, but it's considerably cheaper until you start adding things like the keyboard case, but we'll forget that for the minute. If you're just buying an iPad on its own, this is such good value for a fantastic looking iPad. There are no bezels, well, there's fewer bezels than there used to be. And my guess is that a lot of people who were waiting to upgrade their old iPads, perhaps their old iPad Airs or even their old iPad 2s and all that kind of stuff, saw this and thought, wow, that looks different enough for me to upgrade and change. I would guess that since October last year, a lot of people have bought this iPad Air. I do see a lot of these out in the wild, interestingly. The other reason I think the iPad has this momentum behind it in terms of sales, and you might find this pretty interesting for me to be saying this, is actually down to this, which is the 8th generation iPad. And it's the most classic iPad looking iPad you can buy these days. You know, it's got these big chunky bezels that we were all used to. It's got Touch ID there. Yeah, it's an old fashioned looking iPad, but it's incredibly cost effective. You can buy this in the UK at least anywhere for about £270-ish, which for an iPad, a brand new iPad rocking a really, really good chip and lovely screen as normal, and just this lovely lightweight size, some nice color options, it's a really, really good deal. And again, I would assume that in terms of education, possibly there'll probably be a lot of schools and colleges that will buy these in bulk, but also people who aren't that fussed about a smaller bezel design, or even that the kind of iPad Pro design that was carried across to the iPad Air. Some people don't care about this stuff. They just want an iPad because to them an iPad is their main computer. They don't want to spend too much money. The fact this has a connection for a keyboard as well, and you can use the first generation pencil with it, makes it a very, very capable iPad and a big draw for a lot of people. So my guess, and this is a guess because like I say, we don't see the breakdown of devices from Apple, I'm assuming that they are selling an awful lot of these two iPads. I'm sure the M1 iPad Pros are selling well. There's no reason for them not to really, but I do not think that M1 chip is driving sales. So I have the older 2018 12.9 inch iPad Pro, and it is superb. It's as fast as the day I bought it. I use it mainly for photo editing and a little bit of work. I just don't have any reason to replace it. There's no reason to replace this with the M1 version, and I would guess a lot of people who have that one probably feel the same. So the M1 chip, brilliant. They've put it in the iPad. It's already superb in the Macs, and it has a real place in the Macs. But at the moment, it's got this odd role in the iPad Pro lineup, which just doesn't make use of it. You can't really push that chip. I'm waiting desperately for both Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro to be made available on iPadOS and make use of that M1 chip. At that point, I'll dive in, and I would assume that lots of other creatives and professionals would dive into it as well. If that happens within, let's say, the next 12 months, then the iPad growth, the revenue growth, could really skyrocket, because I think there's a lot of people waiting for that. And providing that Apple keep selling the lower end, in inverted commas, versions of the iPad, the addition of some really powerful software tools to make use of the M1 chip in the new iPad Pros, in theory, means it's going to carry on selling big time. I'm also waiting quite desperately for a new iPad mini. Now, the only iPad mini I have is this one, which I haven't turned on for years. It's I think the first generation, but I love the size of it. I've always liked this size iPad for consumption reasons, and there are rumors of a kind of iPad Air like redesign coming to that. I hope they do that, and I also think other people want this. So again, if you combine this with the potential of doing more with the M1 chip and the continued sales of the 8th generation and the iPad Air, then I think the future is pretty bright for the iPad. I'd love to know though, have you bought an iPad in the last 3 months? During that quarter, that record-breaking quarter, did you buy an iPad? And if you did, which one was it? Did you go for the iPad Air? Did you go for the 8th generation iPad? Or did you buy one of the new M1 iPad Pros? Let us know in the comments and let us know your reasons for doing it and what you love about that iPad. Until next time, folks, I will catch you in the next video. Cheers.